Okay, good morning, everyone. Is there some particular reason that, except for there not being a chair for Hiromi on this side, that we've split the room between males and females? So there's something the class is trying to tell me? This is in anticipation of the debate. You teaming up with your favorite people. Is that what's happening? Girl power. So a little unfair. I think the guys are outnumbered. Hiromi's the only one over there willing to help them out. Okay, well today we are going to have our debate on nature versus nurture as part of the gender topic. So in particular, some of the points that you should find very useful, of course, are the points that Greer mentions about what impact society has on people's understanding of gender, right? That the idea that gender is a social construction, not necessarily a natural construction. So it's good to kind of think about what did Greer mean when she said those things. And of course, the other point that was discussed a bit in last class with the presentation group, looking at the situation in Japan, right? So in the final discussion. So think about, in terms of what points you're going to raise for that debate, you'll be able to kind of draw on ideas from Greer as well as kind of your own experience and your own understanding of the situation that's here in Japan, as well as the reports that we understand about the gender divide in Japan and what it means to have a gender divide. All right? Sounds good? So we're not going to start with the debate. We're going to start instead with the reading, looking at what Greer had to say. And then so that we can kind of establish a few ideas first. Then you can use some of those ideas for the debate. And I also have a video that I'm preparing up here to show you. It's called Dr. Money and the Boy with No Penis. All right, it's on YouTube. I'm not showing you the whole thing. If you do want to search for it later and watch the entire documentary, be careful how you search for it. Money, penis. All right, just be careful. That's all I'm saying. All right. Maybe don't search for it on campus. Anyway, but it is a very compelling documentary, and it does it sort of discusses, right, this sort of aspect about nature versus nurture. So I'm going to show you that as well. All right, so that you can use that, and we will finish the class with the debate. All right, on nature versus nurture. All right. So since you have sort of not shuffled yourselves up today, I will give you some numbers. All right, so Sako, I'll start with 1. All right. All right, so the first thing we need to do is have a look at the handout on Greer. Start with the pre-reading questions. I said before social construct. Greer's words are cultural construct. So think about that cultural construct. Why is masculinity a cultural construct? All right, so there are 4 pre-reading questions there. Go ahead. And this is still not working. Wakana, can you move back there? Yeah, that's good. All right. I want no one's back to anyone, right? So poor Masako has her back to. Oh. And then Masako, you can come sit over here, and then you can all face each other again. There you go. All right, perfect. Okay, let's talk about these. Let's talk about these questions all together. We kind of have a lot to try to squeeze in today, so I'll move things along quickly. Just so before we get into responses to these pre-reading questions, of course, a few things to think about with Germaine Greer. She is our only living author of this semester, so that's a very exciting thing. And one point that, of course, is made about the reason why she's so important is that she was a leading feminist voice, right, in the mid 20th century. So this whole idea that she was a leading feminist voice is, of course, interesting because she's also critical of feminism, right, as a concept. So it is kind of important to kind of keep that in mind about where she was coming from and what her intentions were with what she wrote. But certainly the influence that she's had is undeniable. The work that she produced in the 1970s helped to sort of bring authors like Woolf, sort of back up again, right? So the importance of what it was that she was doing that may have otherwise kind of been ignored for quite some time before these things came out, right? So the discussion, right, that she generated, the debate that she generated at that time is really important, and it still influences our understanding of these particular aspects today. Okay. I won't say much more about that. I'll let you tell me more about it. So in terms of her ideas, why is masculinity a cultural construct? Hiromi?
you are raised up. You are educated according to the environment that you're operating.
All right. So yeah, I mean this ultimate issue looks at cultural differences in masculinity, right? So where does masculinity come from? Greer says it's taught. Right? This idea of masculinity. Masculinity isn't natural, right? That's not nature. It's something that's taught. And it is kind of an interesting point, I think, especially for the people in this room, that you have a good understanding of cultural differences between certain aspects of culture, such as masculinity. How many people would say that the masculinity is the same here in Japan as another culture that you are familiar with? Be it American or Filipino or Brazilian or different, right? Very different. Barbara, can you say anything about it?
Like, I can't really say anything about it, but it was clear for me when I went to the United States and I came back. I saw all the men so feminine. Like, I don't know how to explain just what it was.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, there's a point where your understanding of masculinity was formed when you were in the U.S. Is that what you're saying? And then in Japan it was different, or was it the other way around?
No, when I was in Japan, I didn't feel that.
You didn't. Okay, so you didn't notice it.
Yeah, I went to the U.S. I didn't feel different.
Okay.
But when I came back.
So when I came back. Okay. All right. Okay. Good. All right. So the kind of. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, why would this be something that you would notice if it's the culture that you grew up in? This is what is right. This is your reality, right? It's your schema, right? And then when you go overseas, it may sort of kind of a gradual development into understanding what's happening there, right? So masculinity in the United States was one thing. Then when you came back to Japan, you realized just how different that masculinity that you grew to understand as masculinity there was here. Yeah? That it somehow seemed, compared to an American understanding of masculinity, less masculine. Yeah? Do other people agree?
I thought when I was in the States, I thought there was more different groups, like what she was talking about, the male group. I thought there was more groups than more like feminine, not like this strong male image, and then that kind of thing. Like there was different groups that was socially acceptable, which you wouldn't really see in Japan. So
Okay. Yeah, let me just make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So in the U.S., you noticed that there were groups that had kind of similar levels of masculinity?
Yeah, I will like maybe different image of masculinity.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
Like more feminine was like, I don't know.
And there was a divide, a noticeable divide between groups of men, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, right, yeah. I probably have to agree. I know what you mean. I think that kind of divide, maybe we don't see in Japan, right? People don't divide themselves socially by levels of masculinity in Japan, right? But I think for those people who know the United States, you'd probably say, yeah, right? There's something that you can see there, right? That somehow masculinity is a unifying factor, right? Or a level of masculinity, right? Something that we may judge as being more masculine may cause those people to spend more time together. Taiki, do you have anything to say about that? American football?
Well, I don't know if it's culture, but like American football is definitely like what you do would be like what makes the group, and then
masculinity
would depend on which group you belong to, kind of like what she said.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. So kind of developing within a group.
All right.
The group influences each other in terms of masculinity. Okay. I mean, this is good. It certainly all sort of goes along with the idea of what Greer was saying. So I guess the idea is that we can say we agree with Greer on this point. Yeah? Does anybody want to disagree with her? With this idea about what she's saying? Okay. All right. Now we've kind of covered a lot of the other questions already with that discussion, but we'll go through them quickly. What is the argument against masculinity being a cultural construct? Saku.
Like, is it people treat differently by masculinity, like as we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
In society, masculinity is like somewhat divided, like level of masculinity is divided, and it is one of the like factor to see people, view people.
Okay. Okay. So what we're doing isn't necessarily influencing masculinity, but using like a kind of natural sense of masculinity to judge people or understand people in some way. Okay. I like that. Does that work for people? I mean, it's a tricky point, right? Because it's sort of, I think it's easy for us to sort of look at this and say, right, masculinity must be learned because there's such a big range of it, right? Like there seems to be so much masculinity, and I'm not talking about a gender divide, I'm talking about masculinity, right? So that, you could have men and women overlapping within that range, right? That you can have some women who are more masculine than some men, right? So it's not a gender divide, right? It's this kind of affect or sort of personality type or something. So you think, if you're going to have such a big range, surely this is something that's learned. At the same time, you could make the same argument to say only something natural could have a range like that, right? If it's learned, it would be much more compartmentalized, right? It would be much more, there wouldn't be that same kind of overlap between men and women. Right? You wouldn't have women being more masculine than men if it's learned that way, right? There must be some sense of natural masculinity. Does that work for people? All right. So you can see why this debate is a kind of ongoing debate, right? This nature versus nurture concept. And this is sort of central to that argument. Of course, this is probably the most fun question you had of the pre-reading questions. How differently is a male baby raised from a female baby in your culture? So Hiromi kind of raised the point when she talked about the first question, right? That it depends, right? People sort of learn different ways, right? Depending on how the culture that they grew up in. Barbara kind of made the same point too, right? Growing up here in Japan, it was one thing. But think about how you maybe, right, treat babies, or you see babies being treated in Japan. Yuki, what do you think? Yeah, I think clothing is a really, really good point. I mean, as a little baby, you'll notice that little girls are purposely put only in pink, right? And little flowers are put in their hair, right? Because parents get really frustrated when people say, "Oh, your little boy is so cute." It's a girl. Right? It's this really sort of, kind of upsetting, frustrating moment. So there's this point, right? So that socially, parents want to make it clear, like, this is a girl. Look at her in pink, right? I mean, it's a baby. She has no hair. Could be a boy, could be a girl, right? It's just a baby. They all look the same when they're that small, right? But there's this point, right, socially, that you want this baby to be received as the gender it is, right? That somehow that social perception, social acceptance of this baby as a baby, where the baby doesn't even know what's going on, is somehow that important, right? So it comes right from the beginning. Names, that's a really interesting point, because of course there are names that work for both males and females, right? Names like Yuki, right? Or Hiromi, or, right? We've got these names that, right, sometimes it's given to both males and females. But certainly, right, we have sort of, I think certainly in Japan, and names ending in ko, right? There are very specifically female, right? And then for males, what's a good example? To. Yeah. Yeah. Right, I mean, but it is quite, I mean, it is interesting how that does work with Japanese names, and I think it is an interesting point, that in terms of listing names that do get used for males and females, the list is quite short compared to a lot of other languages, so it's, that kind of divide is an interesting point. Good. Other ideas about this one? It's okay? All right, saving time. Okay, how do male organizations help shape the masculine male? Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit. Taiki was talking about American football, for example. Do male organizations shape the masculine male? Wakana?
Yeah, because if they're in a group with all males, probably they'd have a feeling that they want to be more developed than others and be competitive and take leadership and all that.
All right.
being with male helps male.
Okay, so it's interesting that you chose a few distinct traits that we associate with masculinity, right? So competitiveness and leadership, right? So there are these sort of ideas that we associate as masculine traits, and so the idea of putting all of that together into a single group then generates more of that, right? Especially with a trait such as competition, right, and leadership, right? That there's always this trying to reach the top. People know the phrase alpha male. You heard this before? Alpha male. The alpha male is the male who must be the leader, asserting power, right? Asserting leadership, and it's kind of an interesting point that it's alpha male, right? I mean, why not alpha female? So you have to kind of think about this point. How is this a specifically male thing, right? This kind of leadership role. All right. Anybody have anything else to say about these 4 questions? Okay for now? All right. So there are 6 questions here, and what I'm going to do is have you go ahead and start on all 6 of them, and then I'm going to come around and assign you a question to be responsible for. All right? All right, let's go through these.
Have short hair and be confident in all that.
Let's go through these critical questions as a whole class. We're going to start with question number 1 up here in the front. Masako. So at what age does induction into masculinity begin?
It doesn't say in the text, but it says that it doesn't say, but before they enter school, and the boys are trained to be masculine, they are treated similar like girls.
Okay.
So, and this, they have to decide whether they are going to be feminine or masculine before the teens.
Okay, all right, yeah. I mean, there's this whole sort of induction into masculinity. Greer makes the point that it's kind of an ongoing process in a person's early years, right? So before school starts, I mean, we're talking young, right? Like between 3 and 5, right? And it's at that stage when people are learning, what that means, right? Sort of getting an idea of what it means. Not that they're necessarily identifying with it yet, right? But they're getting the induction to it. Like, okay, this is a masculine thing. We're going to talk a bit, as we get through this about masculinity being seen as more positive or negative in a particular culture. But at this stage, just thinking about what happens to an individual at a very early stage, they are beginning to be taught some of these ideas, cultural ideas about masculinity from a very early age, and then eventually, right, they kind of have to make their own decisions about where they fit into what they've grown to understand about masculinity. Does that work? All right, good. What about number 2? What is a good definition of masculinity?
Masculinity is a system that is the complex of learned behaviors and subtly coded interactions that forms the connective tissue of corporate society.
Okay. All right. I mean, it's sort of being able to take a kind of scientific approach to masculinity's function in our society is a good way to go, right? It helps us to kind of clarify it and put some boundaries around it. But the idea of it being a system, right? A code of behavior?
Coded interactions.
Coded interactions, okay. And then corporate?
Coded interactions that forms the connective tissue of corporate society.
Okay, it forms the connective tissue of corporate society. All right. So there's this idea that that business, right, is related to the interactions of masculinity or that type of interaction that fits within a cultural understanding of a system. Okay. All right. So I mean, this is where we kind of have to think about this idea about a positive aspect of masculinity. Masculinity somehow being seen as more positive than femininity, right? So we associate things with masculinity towards success, right? So things like corporate culture, right? That business, right, somehow is successful due to masculinity. Looking at business is certainly, it's hard to explain exactly where it all came from, that we have so many men in business and so few women in business, but people have a lot of ideas about it. And then there's certainly, of course, examples of women succeeding in business or men succeeding in business without taking what we understand to be masculine approaches to that system. Some of those particular traits that you can think about are happening more recently, right? So sort of alternative approaches to business, right? That might not have been seen as masculine, might have been seen as feminine. Something that's seen as more considerate of, more sensitive to emotional impact or affect, right, within interactions between people, as opposed to a kind of competitive nature. Right, so taking that different approach, taking a distinctly non-masculine approach, the way we understand masculinity, and succeeding in business. All right, it's kind of an important point to think about, because masculinity, as we understand it, is a system, right? And we do have our codes that allow us to identify those interactions as masculine, but our understanding of what that means for the society we live in is what's changing. Does that work? Does that make sense? Yeah? Because it is a bit tricky, and we're going to talk about it, especially with number 6 altogether, about even just how our understanding of the impact of masculinity, or the importance of masculinity, of having masculine traits to succeed, is different, right, compared to even when Greer wrote this. Okay, so number 3, how do women survive in a masculine organization?
Women can just do what they're better at than males, like becoming managers with more nurturing and stuff, and to not get in the way of the masculinity, because then they're just brought down as soon as they try to join in.
Okay, I think that's a good description. I think getting in the way of is a little bit tricky, but I like that. It almost seems like a very strategic choice of words coming from you, so I'll talk about that. But yeah, this idea that there are particular traits that we associate with women as opposed to men, not we're talking about masculinity in particular, but ideas of management, right? So being able to nurture, right, better interaction, right, in business would be something that we are able to associate with women. So sort of taking advantage of those strengths. Right, so in order to succeed or survive, right, in the masculine organization. So interesting, right, though, get out of the way of that competitive masculinity that's happening, right, sort of steer around it. And I think it's an interesting point, because the idea isn't that you can't compete with it, but that it's, in order to beat it, that you kind of work around it, right, that you move around it. So there is no sort of woman competing in the male masculine competitive thing. Right, that woman will somehow be shut down because she's a woman.
But she could be like Hillary Clinton or something, where she uses her husband, because he's a male, so she still has power. Okay. And she kind of uses him to get her power. Okay, all right. So yeah, using strategies to at least establish some kind of position allows you then to survive in that. All right. So having some kind of connection to it in some way gives you the step up. Yeah, Hillary Clinton is a good example of that. Good. Good. Any other things about this one? All right. Number 4 then. What is the significance of courage in the formation of the masculine male?
So she also mentions that courage is like the number 1 primary virtue of masculinity, but we were talking about how courage like represents or signify and it's like the number 1 trait to show a masculine male.
Okay, all right. So it's a top and most important trait for an establishment of masculinity in its positive understanding and form. All right. So would courage is courage something that would be encouraged for women? Is it important for women to be courageous, to have courage? Or that is making a woman courageous, making her masculine? better for a woman not to have courage.
Meaning behind courage for men and women are different.
No, I think that's a good answer. I mean, there's something about kind of playing the game. I mean, there's this point about surviving, right, in male organizations. And if the male organization is courage in this case, then how does the woman participate and survive in that organization, right? That understanding of that concept. She would have to kind of do her own thing, right? Sort of moving around it in some way. Strategically, right? Making her way in some way. But yeah, we wouldn't want to make it a kind of polar opposite, right? We don't want to say, right, men have courage and it's bad for women to have courage, right? But there is this sort of possessiveness, right? That somehow masculinity, right, contains courage, right? Like courage is a masculine thing and you can't have any of it, you woman, right? But that's certainly not the case, right? It wouldn't make sense to say to a girl, oh, you shouldn't grow up to be courageous. You should be scared, because that's what girls do. Any of the girls in this room taught to be scared of the world? Does that make sense? Right, so we have to kind of think about what does it mean? How is it a masculine trait and yet something that, right, should be a part of every human being? Okay, number 5. What does Greer mean when she says, real men do not fuss or scurry?
Men do not like fuss or scurry. What she means is that it's men, they prove their own hardness by constantly challenging, as in they test their physical and mental strength with like direct competition.
Okay.
Instead of fussing and scurrying.
Okay, so what is fussing and scurrying?
Like fussing is like talking, complaining, arguing.
Complaining, arguing, okay, all right. Being generally unhappy, yeah, about something. Okay, and then scurrying?
Like running away.
Running away, okay, all right. So these would be traits that we associate as feminine traits?
Yeah.
Okay, so would these be traits that we would encourage in women? If you're going to be a real woman, you need to learn how to complain and run away. I mean, it's an interesting point, right? There's more, right? This is just more. This is very good. Good answer. But there's more connection here as well, right? That there's this idea that somehow masculinity is the goal, right? That somehow masculinity is what it means to be strong, right? What it means to, not be afraid of the world, right? To have courage, to succeed, right? That somehow this is the goal for everyone. And yet, we still have to try to establish, right, the difference, right? That we have this gender divide. People are raised differently, and yet, right, how does this work? If you think about the questions that it raises, you think, really, in this world, essentially what that means is that it's a whole lot easier for males. There's no confusion, right? So a male is brought up into the world with lots of people telling him how strong he is, right? And you're gonna be a big boss someday, and all these really nice things, right, to the boys. And to the little girls, they say things like, you're so pretty. Maybe you'll marry some nice, strong boss man someday, right? There's this sort of idea of this kind of reducing, right? It's kind of confusing, especially for a little girl, right? Because she thinks, well, why? I'm going to be his boss. Why wouldn't I be his boss? And you stop and you think about it and you say, yeah, you're right. Why wouldn't you be his boss, right? Why wouldn't you be his doctor? Why wouldn't you, right, be his president? So, there's this kind of idea that, somehow things that we associate with successful or being successful in life are somehow male, right? Or somehow masculine, right? So being able to kind of clarify that difference is important. All right, number 6. Why is killing in war no longer a gendered activity? Now, this is an important question to think about in terms of what sort of has happened with our understanding of masculinity since Greer sort of generated all this debate and discussion about it. So I'm going to come to Saku for this one. All right. What have you got in your notes about killing in war is no longer a gendered activity?
I thought that it's not gender activity anymore because today there are much improvement in technology, so gender or masculinity doesn't matter.
Okay. All right, this is a kind of important point. I mean, we sort of associate killing in war with a masculine thing, right? You were talking about killing, right, as a thing that's associated with courage. And so there's this kind of point that when you think about wartime, right, the military, that the way that things have developed, that it's not that anymore, right? That the strategic approaches, it's not just brute force anymore, right? It's not, who's got the most strength and can push these people down or knock them out or shoot them. Right? It's more of this idea of how can we strategically approach this. Maybe if we have a little bit of more encompassing sensitivity to this issue, we might be able to figure it out better. Can we understand our enemies better? Can we communicate somehow better with this situation? Ooh, we're starting to step into traits that we associate with femininity. Right, so it's a really kind of important point to think about how those types of things have developed. And certainly technology has allowed those things to generate more and to make it more acceptable for people, right? Women in the military back in the 70s would have been seen as very masculine, right? This whole idea of being in the military as, you have to cut off all your hair and you have to do all these things, you have to dress the same in uniforms that make you look like a boy, right? So there's this whole sort of thing where those things have changed, those things have developed, and now there are sort of places and positions where masculinity doesn't have the same sort of strict boundaries or guidelines that it used to have as far as our understanding of how it worked in things like killing and war. Okay, good. Now, we are quickly running out of time, but I will show you as much as I can of this documentary, Dr. Money and the Boy with No Penis. Now, this very funny title. The doctor's name is actually Dr. Money, which is a kind of ironic name. And he was very sure, very confident that masculinity, right? That masculinity isn't really the only thing that's a social construct or a cultural construct. That it's actually maleness, right? That being male is a cultural construct, social construct. So this particular point, of course, is important. I mean, Germaine Greer had her problems with ideas about what it means for a person to be identified according to masculinity or maleness or gender, right? In the introduction, it was saying she accepted a professorship at the University of Tulsa and founded Tulsa Studies in Women's Literature. In 1989, she returned to Newnham College, Cambridge, but left in 1996 over a stand she took against offering a fellowship to Rachel Padman, a transsexual, on the grounds that she had been born a man and that Newman was a college for women. And so there was this whole sort of point about, what does it mean to identify as a particular gender, and why do we restrict ourselves on actual physical representation, right, in this world? If a person identifies with a different gender inside, does that mean then that they are confused, that they need to see a psychiatrist, right, and that has to be worked out of them? Or do we embrace that nature within them? So Dr. Money sort of has this idea that none of that really is the case, right? That ultimately, if people have this idea that they are somehow not the right gender, that was something that they learned, right? And that they could have learned it a different way, depending on the situation they grew up in. Okay, I am almost ready, I swear. I was too busy walking around listening to what everybody was saying instead of getting this ready. So I'll just be a moment. What you can do is, while I'm getting this ready, actually have a look at the discussion point that's there, because that question is an important one. So, to what extent do you feel that Greer thinks masculinity is a desirable quality in society? Masculinity run riot. All right, what do you think about that? And I will interrupt you in a moment. All right, so as I promised, I'm interrupting you really soon. So I'm going to show you just the beginning of this documentary. It's actually, the full documentary, I think, is almost 50 minutes long. Not 15, but 50 minutes long. So we don't have time to watch the whole thing. But I will show you the introduction of it so you can get an idea of the story and what happens in this particular case. All right. So let me just, there we go. Dim the lights. Okay, I have to stop there just because we don't have enough time. But I can see that you're intrigued. This is certainly a very, very interesting documentary that traces this particular story, and it is, it certainly has a lot to say about this concept of nature versus nurture. Dr. Money really believed that if a person were raised in a particular way, that child would be able to identify with that way that the child was raised, which kind of counters this point about sort of gender identity issues, right? And so it was a kind of interesting point that he was part of this gender identity clinic, but he sort of had his theories, right, that were sort of important, never having the opportunity to actually conduct research to establish any kind of real understanding of it, and then here came this opportunity, right? So it was a kind of jumping at the chance as a scientist, but not necessarily considering human consequences. So what we need to do now is use the remaining time to talk about nature versus nurture. So we're going to have a nature side and a nurture side. I think what I need to do, just to balance out the room, is just have somebody, sorry, can I get you, is that all right, to come over and join this side so that we've got even numbers? All right, and then this side of the room is going to argue nature. All right, so this side of the room is going to argue nurture. All right, so you're looking at cultural constructs, right? Social constructs. You're looking at innate constructs, right? Things that people are born with that they feel from the inside. All right. Now, in terms of generating your top 2 ideas, right, your top strongest points that you want to make in your group, do think about the Japanese context. All right, think about what happens here in Japan so that we can all sort of relate to it more easily. All right, so within your group, top 2 ideas to support your side of the debate, nature or nurture.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. Get ready to take some notes because you're going to want to counter, right? You're going to choose one that you hear from the other side that you want to argue against, all right? So one of these points that you want to argue against. All right, so we're hearing from nature first. All right.
Oh,
Is
okay.
that Aito? Okay.
So we're going to talk about nature, and a person is not the thing that the person has is like physically men are more muscular than women are when they're born because that's how they're naturally built, and for that'll be physical, and for mental personality, even if like twins are born, it's not that they have the exact same personality as the other kid, because they're like maybe one boy might like be whiny and the other one might be
Fussy.
a little stronger, and that's not something that you can influence by culture. It's what they have from the beginning. Yes.
Good.
That's argument.
Okay. Very good. All right. Any questions about that one? All right. So we'll move over to the first group on this side, which is in the back. Yeah. All right.
Our argument is that how kids are scolded.
Scolded. Yeah. Reprimanded.
Different. Like if a girl is crying, they just let her cry, and if a boy's crying, they're like, okay, stop, be a boy. And there was a experiment done with when a baby was shown to a
Like a group of It was a group of ladies, and then they were told to describe this baby, and they brought a baby, and the baby, they were told that the baby was a girl, so they were like, oh, she has a sweet smile, she has like soft skin, I guess. And they took the baby out, and they're like, we're gonna bring another baby, and they just brought the same baby in blue, and they're like, oh, it's a boy, and they're like, oh, he has a strong chin, he has a strong eye, and it's the same baby. So it's like the way that those ladies, if that was the mother, then they would treat them by that gender, and then that baby will learn through like nurture that he is a boy or he is a girl, and then all that stuff.
Yeah, so the baby is told what it is to be boy or girl. Okay. Good. All right. Over to group 3. Yeah, that's you.
Okay. Well, that movie is definitely an argument for was it David or Brenda or?
Yeah, born Bruce, then Brenda, then Dave became David. Yeah.
He proves that nothing can bend nature because although like his mother and the doctor and everyone could influence him from the outside, he couldn't function well because as a girl because he was a boy in the inside, even though his penis wasn't there. So that's how strong nature is for one being, I guess. And our second argument is, you can go.
Well, like, we saw nature is stronger than nurture because in Japanese society, like, people who dress like female are not very, like, male who dress like female are not very accepted. They're minority in Japan. So, like, even though those people are trying to be female by changing nurture side of gene, it is not accepted in society. So we think nature is much stronger in Japan.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that. Is everybody okay with that second point? I mean, there's this. So the idea is that the nature of that person tells that person to do that thing, but ultimately that person cannot fool anyone of who that person really is. Okay. So if for example, a man feels compelled to wear women's clothing, people see that as a man wearing women's clothing, not, oh, is that a woman?
No.
Right, okay. Because nature is stronger in those cases. All right. Good. All right, and over here for the last group. Sally?
We tried to use the text that says that Pamela Martins, what she said in paragraph, what is this, 12? That barbaric aggressive behavior has to be cloned if you want to advance. So we pointed out that masculinity can be learned, or it has to be learned if you want to succeed in the male-dominated world, I guess. So we argue that nurture is above nature.
Good. Okay. And second point?
Oh. We don't have Okay. I noticed that even within Japan or even in other countries, for example, I know this family with 2 sons. Okay. But then it's the eldest one with the more alpha male attitude as opposed to the younger one who has this, I think it's called the beta male attitude. It's more feminine. He's more sensitive. And the eldest one has more leadership, has more control. So I think that explains how nurture has a big influence on nature.
I think that's an important point. Yeah, I think, and with Japan, I mean, the sense of hierarchy, right? Yes. So the elder, right, is the leader.
They have more expectations from the eldest. Yeah. So I think that influences everything.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. All right. So what you want to try to do is look at these arguments on both sides and just try to figure out, where was there a weakness in the opposing argument? All right. Where would you be able to assert your side as the stronger influence in what makes us who we are? All right. So just take a few minutes to talk about that, and then we'll go around, and you're only going to have the chance to talk about one argument from the opposing side. right, so we're going to go around now for the second round. So please listen carefully. And in terms of time, we're going to be running out of time. So we'll try to see what we can squeeze in. But otherwise, do plan on having a final comment to send to me. All right, we're going to do it that way, like we did last time. All right, we're good at chatting away the time in the debates. Okay, so let's start with group 1 for the first counter argument. Yeah.
So we are going to argue against the elder boy and the younger boy, and the brother. The elder boy has leadership or power is kind of instinct, because elder one often bigger than younger, and kind of tendency to protect the weaker. So we say it's different in personality. It's kind of instinct.
Okay. So the fact that they are older than someone else means they have a natural sense of protecting that someone else. But if you're the younger of the two, then you have no one younger than you to protect. Okay. Good. All right, and we go over to group 2.
For the cross-dresser transsexual thing, it's like they're being more accepted in society now because they're pretty much on media, like in the media every single day. And some of the cross-dressers, I'm guessing, like, their goal isn't to become a woman. They're okay with being a man, but they like to dress up as women. So it's not, they might not feel as if they're not accepted, and they're just...
Okay, so they're dressing this way because society is nurturing that kind of behavior. Like it's so it's okay for them to express themselves.
And it doesn't mean that they want to be a woman, which will probably make them more accepted in the society, but they're pretty much already sort of accepted.
Okay. So because I guess the difficult thing here though is if what they're expressing is their natural selves, right? Then where do we say that nurture is the stronger point in that case?
Because some of them were raised like how David was David.
Yeah.
And he committed suicide, but they were okay with it.
Okay. So for an example, they're in a male body, so they're raised as males, but they don't see themselves that way, so they dress this other way, and this is okay to do this because society tells them it's okay to do this. All right. Good. All right, and over to group 3.
Wait, I have one question. Is this debate on whether nature is stronger or whether it is better?
Stronger. Yeah. Which one is the stronger influence on who we are?
Well, I thought the debate was on which is better, so I kind of said
go with that.
So they said that the society is man-based, so then that's better for the society to advance. But then I thought the whole nurture thing will kill off individual instincts and what they really want to do. So then I thought the nature was better to value individualism.
Yeah. No, that works. Yeah, if people understood that natural qualities were the real strength, rather than forcing social restrictions on who people are, then society would be better off. I think that's a good point. Does everybody get that? Yeah, and how that goes against that point about masculinity must be learned to succeed, right, that argument? Right? So the point that Hirayoshi's making is that if people didn't force that kind of masculinity on people, through social interactions, if they just allowed things to happen naturally, actually society would be better off. Okay. All right. Good. And over to group 4.
Well, in Japan, when there's a lesbian couple, one wears a male outfit, and for others, the male outfit woman looks like the guy. Looks like guy. So it is possible that outfit.
Well, it's an argument against the others
Mm-hmm.
about the man wearing a woman's outfit cannot be pointed out as a woman, but just a man wearing a woman's outfit.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to point out that how about the Japanese lesbian couples?
Mm-hmm.
You could somehow tell who is the guy in the relationship and the girl in the relationship when you see that the guy in the relationship wears rather masculine outfits, and then there's that understanding that's so that person has the understanding that male or masculinity or someone with a male personality wears a masculine outfit.
Yeah, and is necessary to complete the couple in society, in social understanding of what they are as a couple. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tricky point because this is going against the argument that nature is so strong that a person isn't or can't use society's understanding of what they are in order to fool them in some way. And the example would be those cases where there are lesbian couples, for example. I mean, this certainly isn't the case of all lesbian couples in Japan, but that there are lesbian couples in Japan where one part of that couple appears male, and society accepts that person as male, right? So not working outside of that function. Okay, so what you need to do, since we're out of time, is reflect on this, right? So try to figure out where you stand on this. Try to see if you can assert that through what we discussed here, with the arguments on both sides, if you do believe that one side is stronger than the other. Is nature more of an influence on who you are, or is nurture more of an influence on who you are? Think about what Greer had to say about it. We can think about the demise of poor Dr. Money. All right.